Grace to you and peace from God our Father and Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. So we have gathered in the midst of his presence here this morning. Especially in the fall, we were looking at the movement of the Hebrew people in the early days as they were trying to get the promised land and coming out of a time of slavery in Egypt. And it's at that moment when Moses goes up on a mountain and he gets the Ten Commandments from God. And I had always thought of these very difficult to hear words from God as being kind of the prelude or all-encompassing for the various commandments when God says, I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting iniquity to the third and fourth generation. But I went back and read it, and it's interesting. Especially as we made that journey through the fall, I became more and more interested in the sense that first commandment, if you will, that you shall have no other gods over me, is really the foundation for the Ten Commandments. That if we were to follow just that one commandment, if we really had no other little g gods in our lives, all the rest would work itself out. And here's what that sounds like from Exodus 20. Then God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, or any likeness of what is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. Excuse me. You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers to the children on the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands of generations to those who love me and keep my commandments. So you see, this reference, these difficult words to hear, are connected with that which we worship, connected with whether or not we attend to God as the only God. And so all the rest of the commandments flow from that now after this, but to me, that's something that we really need to pay attention to. We need to take notice. And so every time has all sorts of little g gods, but it seems to me, particularly in our time, with all of the variety of things that are available to us in our culture, all technology and what have you, that there are a lot of potential little g gods for us to watch out for. So, as some of you know, I like to hang out at the brew house in town. It gives me an opportunity to connect with people that I might not otherwise connect with, be out there in the community, and not the least of which, in the context of preaching, you know, the biggest complaint these days about contemporary preaching is that it's not relevant. It doesn't connect to what's going on in the rest of the world. So hopefully, when I sit and listen to what's going on around me, when I communicate in conversation with folks, that's given me a better sense of what people are really thinking about. That, you know, we have all sorts of agendas that we hear, all the voices that are out there, and they're loud voices. They get the attention of media. But what really is going on is what happens in the coffee shops, in our homes and what have you, in the brunch of conversation on a Sunday morning. Those are the times when people are real. And so I love listening to folks. If there are hushed tones, I try not to listen to what they're conversing about. But there's sort of an unwritten rule at the brew house that if you're speaking in a normal type of tone, that anyone is invited to enter in if they so desire. And you can certainly pay attention to what they're talking about. Well, there's a group of guys, old men, who are there, must be every day, because whenever I'm there, they seem to be there for the last 6 months or so. And this time, on Wednesday, one of the guys turned to me and he said, I bet you get tired of listening to us old guys talk about what we talk about, that it's just pretty earthy, basic types of stuff. And I said, no, you know, that's really what I'm looking for as a pastor. I want to know what people are talking about. Oh, okay. And he said, well, yeah, but we really don't talk about religion because then we'll get in fights. That's not good. That we'll get in fights. And so I'm kind of going back and forth on how I feel about that. But I'm pretty cool with it in the sense of what I pick up from these guys is they're really spiritually driven. They live their lives in the context of an eternal reality, and they don't want to take any chances of getting on each other's nerves and tarnishing that. So they do talk about basically everything except religion. So they've got politics, death, and taxes. When you're old guys, well, that's just pretty much what you do. And it's fascinating stuff because they are just so real. Here's a for instance of what they talked about this last Wednesday. One of those pieces, if you're an old guy, death. And so that's what they were going, what's going to happen to my body? Again, I heard them to be saying they really didn't care so much, all in all, that it was an eternal journey, but you want your body to be handled in an appropriate kind of a way. I mean, you just sort of respect, all right. And so that's what they were talking about. And the one guy goes, well, I have a military background, and I kind of like the idea that flowers are put on a grave ever so often. So I want to be buried in a military cemetery. All right. Next one says, well, nothing against that, but I want to make sure that my grave doesn't feel like a shrine. It's just there, and that's where my body's residing, and it is what it is. Okay. Third guy pops up, and he says, well, all that's well and good, and I'm sort of in the middle, maybe. I just hope people are going to mow the grass. I like that. Make sure the cemetery is well taken care of. Those are real types of ways of looking at life. They speak about what our gods are. And so when you have the opportunity to be out there one way or another in the world, in the coffee shops of life, what do you talk about? What are your little g gods? Do we, where does our energy go? Are we putting all our eggs in the basket of politicians and presidents to take care of nuclear issues in North Korea? Are we putting all our eggs in the basket of the chair of the Federal Reserve when it comes to our money? Or does God somehow fit in the midst of us? Do we hear those words that are so often spoken in the Bible about that, God takes care of the lilies of the field. God takes care of the birds that are out there. If he cares about those, don't you think he cares about you at least as much, and he will make your needs a priority? Those are difficult things for us to think about, and it's so easy for us to say, no, I'm a follower of Jesus, and that's really important to me, but where does that energy find fruition? Is it more so in church and such matters, or what we hear on cable news? Is it more about the spiritual conversations of life, or what we might do of the posts that we have on social media? What is that? Where do we find the energy, what ultimately drives us in the midst of life? And it seems that these threats are most significant for us who would say we are people of faith. It just stands to reason, because you will always get pushed in the arena where you say something's important to you. And so it happens with the Jews. It's difficult for us to place ourselves in the context of these folks. We feel very keenly in the United States about freedom, and we've been free for a very long time, relatively speaking. So there isn't really anyone amongst us that understands what it is to be under the power of some other military, some other nation. So that's what was happening for these folks. They understood themselves to not just be a people, but the chosen people, and that they were supposed to be a great nation. They were supposed to be the world power. And so what is this with the Romans? And they've been struggling with all of this now really for 1,000 years. So they had the notion that the Messiah was going to come and was going to fix that. We in no way can judge this. We can say they made a very terrible mistake and learn from that hopefully in our own lives. But it's totally understandable. They really only had one prayer. Get rid of the Romans. Everything else, okay. Let's be a nation that is not ruled by anyone else. That's all we ask. And so the Messiah should do that. That's what we're waiting for. We've waited, literally 1,000 years since King David. supposed to be a Davidic line king. Jesus comes along and he says, my kingdom is not of this world. I don't really care on that level about Israeli-Roman politics. If a coin has the image of Caesar, then just give it back to him because evidently it belongs to him. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. This is in the context of brutal Romans always being a threat over these people. To hear those words, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, would be real controversial ones, would be ones very difficult to hear, and so it was. So they get pressed. The Jewish folks certainly would call themselves people of faith. They would say that God was their king. But when push comes to shove, fear took over. Because Pilate will say to them, here's your king of the Jews. Why don't you take him back? I find him only irritating. He doesn't pose any threat to the Roman authority. You go deal with him. Because he is your king. And they go, oh, those are fighting words. And you go, no. We have no king but Caesar. Can you see how devastating these words are? Because they're not just even denouncing Jesus. They're not just saying, hey, we have the concept of the Messiah, which, okay, Pilate, you've probably heard about, will be the one to cause a revolt and kick you Romans out. But this Jesus, he talks about loving everybody. And he doesn't seem to be particularly interested in earthly politics and such military issues. So he's not our Messiah. They don't say that. They do away with any sort of notion of God as king. We have no king but Caesar. Put that in the context of the Ten Commandments, where God says, you shall have no other gods over me. And when they don't even stop there, but they say, let his blood be on us and on our children. And you think back to those words from God's mouth that says, I will visit their iniquities to the third and fourth generation. This is such devastating stuff that unfortunately those words get used against Jews into the 20th century for the Holocaust. So you need to recognize the power of your words, the power of what happens when you get to your breaking point, and we all have such a place. We live in a time when our little g gods are numerous. Issues like abortion, homosexuality, politics galore, pursuit of money and wealth, understanding whatever success means in our culture, being one above everybody else. All those kinds of things that in those earthly matters we can make little g gods out of them. And in that context, God comes alongside and says, hey, I am your only God. Again, I'm taking care of you. Trust in me. So we have this issue that goes all the way back to the beginning of time now. This is the journey of God and his people. That you've got the story of Adam and Eve, the first humans, of how God creates humanity and wants them to be in connection to him, in relationship to him. And they make a poor choice. They have one choice that would be unacceptable. And they go running after that one in human nature. And so things will spiral down ever so slowly, but continually for centuries thereafter. Because time will go on and there are threats out there. Military nations that are always fighting with each other. It's the Middle East. It's always been the Middle East, and it looks like it's always going to be the Middle East. That these people are like always at war with each other and internal strife. So the Hebrew people go to God and they go, hey, you're always our big king. We remember what you said back there in Exodus. And so, don't think that we've forgotten that. But it would be nice from time to time to have a human leader. One that we could look to and interact with and could be like your representative on earth. What do you say? And God says, that's not what I want, because it's going to downplay the whole sense of me being your God, me being your king, and that alone. But he relents. And it's interesting. We should take some pause at this point, that when humans become hell-bent and demand it, God seems to be sadly willing to allow it. So they have the judges, as they were called, military leaders, who would arise at a particular period of time, take care of that threat, and then they would go away. So there were several of those. Some more time goes past. Now it's around 3,000 years ago, 1000 BC. And you got you have the emergence of Israel as a world power. This is the moment they've been waiting for. And so they said, now everybody's got it out for us. The big boys. Assyrians, Babylonians, Egyptians, Romans, they're all out there. They've got big armies. And we're supposed to be the people of God. We're your chosen folks, right, God? And so we need to be strong if we're going to stand firm in the midst of all of this chaos. So, again, understand, Big G, you're our king. We remember Exodus 20. You will always be our big K king, but how about a little K king? Huh? Because it was great with the judges, but now there's a constant threat. So we really need a king all the time. And God relents now, again, and gives them their little K kings. And so it keeps spiraling down for the next 1,000 years until you get to Jesus. And that's why Jesus has to come. Because we have just totally messed up a whole notion of God is our king and God alone. It seems that not only are we not willing to do so, but that we are in actuality not able to do so. That at least is the point where God finds himself, that humans simply cannot follow me and me alone. They are going to be tempted and succumb to little g gods. And so you have Jesus come and he takes care of all those things that we could not. So where are we in our own time with our own personal little g gods? Where is it that fear confronts you? We have a pro-life politician who wants his mistress to have an abortion. We have an anti-gay pastor who is discovered with a male prostitute. All these things that are a part of who we are. None of us dare judge another, because we all have these kinds of places where when we get to the edge, fear can grab a hold of us. And we become the people that we don't feel we really are. We do, even Paul, in the New Testament, while he wasn't in that kind of realm, but he said, the things I do, I don't want to do, and the things I don't want to do, I do. So even Paul understood this. The most significant missionary maybe of all the years of Christianity. So where is that point for you? Where is it when push comes to shove that you might back away and in essence say, I have no king but Caesar, or let his blood be on my grandchildren? This is really difficult stuff to confront. And the only way that we can is to recognize that we're all in the same boat, that we all have fallen short according to the Bible, that we all sin, that we are all broken, and that there really is no way forward other than with Jesus. Our culture experiences so much stress, it seems to me, that it is common for us to have depression. And I consider pride to be the other side of that same coin. And that neither one of those is a helpful way to live life well. And so the people of this world, of our culture, of our nation, desperately need to hear that there is good news out there. This last week, we had our monthly ministerial gathering, and the person that did the devotions asked, and this is sort of a little clergy secret, that we're always telling people what they should be doing, and of course we're really hoping that no one ever asks us or expects the same thing back. Because do I, as a clergy, have that elevator speech that if someone comes and says, what good is following Jesus? What's this good news? Can I say it in 35 words or less or something like that? Well, there are 1,000 different ways in which you can answer that question of what is good about following Jesus. And this is one of them today. That all those little g gods that are out there threatening us, bringing us to the edge where we might choose fear over faith, they don't hold power over us anymore, not unless we allow them to do so. That people don't need to be struggling with depression and pride. That Jesus comes and he finds victory over all of them. That's the point. Jesus does what we not only weren't willing to do, but it would seem we're not able to do. And that's the good news. So when you go out there into this world this week, there are people who are either stuck in terrible low self-esteem and depression, or pretending that all of that is not there and presenting sort of a prideful stance. Neither one of those is real. Neither one of those represents who God calls us to be and understands us to be. So you have that opportunity this week to go out into a world that is really messed up. Always has been, always will be. But we certainly have our issues at this point in time. And can say there is a better way to live life, both for now and all of eternity. And it is in recognizing this Jesus. And to understand that when we're baptized, God's Spirit moves within us, in Jeremiah 31, because God is beginning to get it, that humans just can't. So he will say in Jeremiah, I will remember their iniquity no more, and I will write my law upon their hearts. Because evidently writing it on a stone didn't quite work. Wasn't effective enough. So I will write it on their hearts. God's Spirit in baptism moves into our lives, and that's all that God sees, that righteousness that dwells within us. How could anyone not want to live in that kind of freedom? Because that's really what it is. There are all sorts of earthly slaveries, but we often find bondage in the spiritual realm of our emotions, of our feelings. We get bound by them and we miss out on what God really hopes us we would find in freedom.